Hello dear 1000 PS friends, my name is Philip and I'd like to welcome you to our big solo test video with the brand new BMW S1000RR. Stay tuned. There's now a new street version, and that alone was reason enough for us to say, okay, we're going to take this bike and really put it through its paces on the road and later on the racetrack. We've put together a full test team for you. Alongside me, who's meant to play the role of the average everyday rider, we also have Max with us, our sporty all-rounder from the editorial team. Then we've got Lena Kemmer on board, our young racer who's out there on the racetracks of the world with her Yamaha R7. And of course, we've got the Pope and Professor of Motorcycle Tech himself, Martin Bauer. He really knows how to push machines like this to the limit. And that's exactly why we're going to find out for you, what can this thing really do on the road and what can it really do on the racetrack. Here at the Slovakia Ring during the 1000 PS track days, the four of us are testing intensely to see which of these three test bikes performs best on the racetrack. And to make sure everything's comparable, we didn't just take over the racetrack, we also fitted super grippy Pirelli Supercorsa SP tires, 4th generation. Maximum comparability, so you get really solid, meaningful results from us.
As we already know from the engine in earlier models, it still struggles a bit with light vibrations. If you're riding for a longer period of time, especially between 6,000 and 9,000 RPM, you'll really start to feel the vibrations coming through quite noticeably. With the original clip-on handlebars, it's actually still manageable, since we've got bar and weights here that dampen things a little bit. We definitely need 8,000 or 9,000 RPM for it to really start pushing forward. Below that, it moves along nicely and smoothly, but it's not exactly explosive compared to what happens higher up in the rev range. A lot of work has gone into improving this, especially with the variable valve timing system, so that it pulls well from the mid-range too, and that definitely helps. But compared to the top end, it still takes a little moment of thought down low before it really starts to pull properly. Other than that, it's very easy to control. It handles well even when leaned over and you're on the throttle. The throttle control is smooth and predictable. And yeah, the only real downside it brings with it is the overall engine width. An inline-4 engine is naturally wider than, say, a V4 or a triple. If you compare it to the competition with V4 or 3-cylinder engines, you'll notice that difference. And you can feel that the chassis also has to be a bit bulkier, simply because it needs to be built around a wider engine.
We've got a pure inline 4-cylinder with just under 1000 cc, which used to be considered absolute superbike standard, at least until recently. Nowadays, there are a lot of V4 concepts on the market, but I still have to say, on the racetrack, I'm a fan of a pure inline 4, simply because it revs up linearly, is super predictable, and when it comes to power, this BMW definitely isn't lacking. I mean, 210 horsepower, that's seriously powerful. It really stretches your arms when you're blasting down the start-finish straight. Here at the Slovakia Ring, you can easily see 280 kilometers per hour on the display, lit up brightly on the dash. So yeah, that kind of power really is impressive, but what also impressed me was the throttle control. Even in the sharp throttle response modes, what BMW calls engine map, the initial throttle feel is really well done, meaning it doesn't mess up your line at all. No, it actually delivers power smoothly over those first few millimeters of twist, and then as you open it up, the throttle response becomes very progressive. So in those last few millimeters, the power curve really ramps up exponentially, but overall the general throttle feel, how that power is delivered and how well the connection between the throttle and the rear wheel is, Honestly, I really like that about the BMW, but there are a few downsides too. The RR's powertrain still has pretty strong vibrations. You just have to say it how it is, especially when you've ridden other bikes for comparison, it becomes really noticeable. That said, it has gotten a bit better. BMW has done some fine-tuning over the years. It's still not quite as refined as the M1000 RR engine, where everything has been perfectly balanced and there are noticeably fewer vibrations, but it's definitely something you have to mention as a bit of a downside. I also really liked the combination with the gearbox here at the Slovakia ring. The gear ratios work well on a track that's actually quite fast, so you can really benefit from that setup. All in all, yeah, it's a very nice powertrain.
The 210 horsepower of the S1000R are, of course, more than enough for the racetrack, even if it might not be the absolute strongest when compared directly to some others. But in my opinion, that really doesn't matter unless you're chasing the very last 2 or 3 seconds. That's just my personal take on it. Unfortunately, the S1000RR still has those rather noticeable vibrations coming from the engine. That's something that does bug me a bit. Apart from that, though, I think the engine is fantastic. I actually already praised it when riding on the road. And even here, I have to say, I just find that the way you can ride this bike, especially how the throttle response behaves, how cleanly the bike accelerates, there's really not much I can complain about. It's direct, it's precise, and really smooth. The only thing, again, is those vibrations that are still a bit annoying. Other than that, though, it's a great engine. The S1000RR is the only test bike in the group that doesn't use an Öhlins suspension. Is that a disadvantage? I'd say no, because I really think the suspension here also works at a very high level, fully electronic, of course. You can adjust a lot if you want to, and I didn't have the feeling that it absorbs bumps better or worse than the other models. I mean, to be fair, we don't have that many bumps out here on the racetrack anyway. I have to say, when it comes to the suspension, I'm satisfied. It basically meets the expectations I'd have for a bike like this. What I do notice, though, is that because of the suspension and chassis setup, it's definitely more on the agile side. I think that's fantastic out on the road, and on the racetrack it's okay too, but it is definitely the one with the most playful character.
So on the BMW, we've also got an electronic suspension system, namely the DDC. That's where the damping is controlled entirely via electronically adjustable valves. We've known this system from BMW for quite some time now, and I have to say, over the years it's improved a lot. The early generations, especially when it came to the control algorithms for racetrack use, were sometimes a bit suboptimal. But now I'd say it's actually become quite usable. The advantage of this system is something you really feel. In lean angle, thanks to the increased damping, especially during acceleration scenarios, the rear stays relatively high. That means even while accelerating, I can still take fairly tight lines with the bike. The only downside here is that due to the rear end feeling quite high, I end up with relatively little grip, especially at maximum lean. So yes, I can apply load and hold tight lines, but the issue that comes with it is that rear grip starts to let go fairly early. Basically, I end up pushing wide or oversteering out of the corner with the bike. Now, to be fair, this behavior is extremely controllable, but it doesn't exactly help when you're trying to set fast lap times, especially once the tires start to wear down and get into that soft, overheated zone. This tendency becomes even more noticeable. With completely fresh tires, it actually still works pretty well. Even in lean, you can get on the throttle confidently, but that's really just in that sweet spot where the tires are new and have that initial grip. In all other cases, I'd say it starts sliding a bit too much, and that's where I'd personally want a bit more support at the rear, something to push the grip just a little further. And that's where you'd need either different suspension systems or at least different suspension settings, which, to be fair, you can adjust to some extent electronically as well.
I was riding in race mode out on the track, and the suspension is really firm in that setting. So you really do need some proper dynamics in the bike to get the suspension to actually start working. But I really like that. I personally enjoy a firm setup because it just gives me better feedback from the bike. And that goes hand in hand with the strong hard brakes. One big advantage is that it doesn't dive too much at the front when you first hit the brakes. You can let it dip in a really controlled way. And then when accelerating out of the corner, it settles nicely into the rear again. So you can really carry the bike cleanly through the corner. You can actually feel the suspension working. And I really like that. But of course, you do need a certain speed and a bit of energy in the system to really get the suspension to do its job properly.
I sit quite well on the BMW with my height of 1,85 m. I do get the feeling though that I'm sitting a bit more bow-legged on it and the knee angle is fairly tight. You're also sitting relatively close to the steering head. I don't mind that, I actually like it. It makes the bike feel a bit more agile in a way. There are people who say that setup takes away a bit of stability, but personally I think it's totally fine. What you do notice on the BMW is that you're sitting the lowest of all the bikes, and I think the seat height is around 832 millimeters, which means you actually sit higher, if that makes sense. So for non-pros that can actually be quite practical. Of course it comes at the expense of a tighter knee angle, but you can also get your knee down more easily. And yeah, that's definitely good for the ego.
As a tall rider, I'm always happy when I get to hop onto the Double R. I'll show you in a second. This is actually one of the super bikes that I've been told still offers some of the best ergonomics out there for taller and also more solidly built riders. And when you look at the knee angle here for a super bike, it's honestly pretty decent. We've also got the M seat installed, which is a bit taller, but it actually gives you a great, almost comfortable seating position, you could even call it that. And the clip-ons aren't mounted as radically low as they are on some of the other super bikes in this class. So all in all, it's a really comfy, sporty, ergonomic setup. And what I especially liked is this generously shaped windscreen on the 2025 model. When I tuck in, when I really crouch down under the fairing, the wind protection works wonderfully. And what I also really liked was the distance between the seat and the handlebars. You still get a solid feel for the front wheel. You've got good pressure on it, but it's not punishing or overly exhausting. Some of these super bikes, we've got others here in the garage as well, can make you feel like you're riding a piece of gym equipment. But with this one, even after a half-hour session, you've still got enough energy and strength left to keep going. So yeah, I've got to say, ergonomically, this thing is really top-notch. Brake lever and clutch lever, both fully adjustable. The buttons and controls are all logically laid out. We've also got some nice extra parts on here. You can see it. Schills tooling, bling, bling, a bit of carbon too. The foot pegs aren't stock, they're adjustable, but we left them in the same position BMW delivers them in from the factory. So we didn't change anything there. And I have to say, for me, this whole package, just the way it's set up here, fit me absolutely perfectly. Yeah, when things get hot out on the track, the BMW really plays its strengths. And what are those strengths? For me, it was a neutral feeling in every situation. We have good braking stability, a really precise and planted cornering stance. You can really hold a tight line on corner exits. It just handles everything well. It does need a bit of input from the rider, but because of its neutrality, you can move it really well both ways, left or right. And part of that probably comes from some optional bits like the carbon wheels. We've got the optional M carbon wheels on our Double R here, and you definitely notice that reduced rotational mass. That really makes it easier to make corrections or change direction quickly. Overall, I have to say it's a flawless bike that, thanks to its neutral handling, is really accessible and intuitive for beginners to ride. So it's a top-notch weapon for track day rookies.
The basic setup is really focused on easy handling. We can change lean angles pretty effortlessly. It leans in super easily, kind of like what you'd expect from a naked bike. The only thing that gets a bit uncomfortable is the slight lack of stability that comes with that, especially at high speeds. As soon as you flick it quickly into a corner, you lose a bit of front-end transparency and that feeling for the front wheel. This is made a little more sensitive by the suspension setup we have on it. Once you get used to it, it's fine. You definitely benefit from the light handling. You can also tell that BMW tries to compensate for this somewhat twitchy handling with a very stable and firm steering damper. We have a steering damper here that's not electronically controlled or automatic. It has to be adjusted manually. And especially when you're out on track exit or places where you need more steering lock, you have to be careful not to set that damper too stiff, because then it becomes really unpleasant. You can feel how heavy the steering gets. That's just a consequence of BMW building the chassis very agile from the ground up. And with this steering damper, which has a lot of base damping from the factory, they try to counteract that. Overall, I have to say it still works pretty well, even for less experienced riders. It's all minor complaints at a very high level, but it definitely stands out when you talk about handling in this category.
The electronics package BMW has put as standard on the 2025 S1000RR really covers all bases, whether you're a hobby track day rider or a serious racer. I think you'll find all the features you need. I spent a lot of time in the Race Pro modes where you can individually configure every single setting. You can push the setup into a sporty baseline, but then you can still adjust the traction control in plus or minus 7 steps. I was riding around with our Pirelli Supercorsa SP at about -3 or -4, and honestly the traction control felt like a performance feature rather than just a safety net. It worked absolutely fantastic. I also played around with the different levels and adjustment options of the wheelie control, which is really impressive. Like magic, even over the quick crests at the Slovakia ring, the front wheel just gets lifted a few centimeters off the ground. And I think this wheelie control is one of the better ones on the market. It really fascinated me how precise it is. Speaking of precision, I also really noticed how the quick shifter works. Typical BMW, it has a bit of a softer, almost mushy lever feel, but the gear engagement itself is very precise and crisp. The functionality here really impressed me. And if we want to quickly talk about the general control concept, typical BMW, you've got the rotary dial and the classic arrangement of all the little buttons. If you've ever ridden a BMW before, you know exactly how it all works. Same with the S1000RR. These controls have been a solid established standard for years. The display is nicely laid out, really clear, showing all the functions you need on the track. I just really liked it overall.
We've got here a very aggressive brake setup. We have the M performance braking system up front, which means there's barely any lever free play. And when it bites, it really bites hard. I think it's better suited for the racetrack than the street, because here you have the chance to modulate it more finely. Still, I feel like a bit more lever travel would be nice. That would give you a bit more feeling when braking into a corner, especially if you're not an ultimate pro like me. Honestly, for me, it's almost a bit too sharp. The limit performance itself is obviously fantastic. What I noticed though was that I had a few times a slight pulsing sensation. I think some of the other guys noticed it too. It kind of took away a little bit of my last bit of confidence in the brakes performance, besides the fact that it's just very aggressive by design.
Now, I have to say, we're not running stock parts here. We have the optional M calipers, and it's easy to compare with others. But honestly, this brake setup is really incredible. Why? 2 reasons. First, the lever pressure point is rock solid and very crisp. It's almost like a race brake. It's crazy how they managed to get such a sharp pressure point with those long brake lines and the complex lean angle dependent systems that are involved. It's really close to what you get on a true race bike with direct lines. Second is the actual braking power you get at the wheel. With these optional M calipers, the deceleration is a real experience. Now, we do have a slight pulsing in the brake. We're not sure if it's coming from the pads or a slight imbalance in the disc. But anyway, when everything is working properly, it's an absolute delight. Even with this slight pulsing, the braking performance was impressive. Let's also take a quick look at our gear. You might have noticed that our test crew was all wearing Nex helmets, specifically the XR3R model. That's the sportiest helmet in the Nex portfolio. It's made with a carbon shell, pleasantly lightweight, 1,350 grams in size medium. And what I personally really liked was the great aerodynamics. With that additional spoiler element on the back, color matched to the visor, it really looks the part too. Visually, it's a real eye-catcher. Very classy and high-quality finish. The ventilation also impressed us. Even on the racetrack, our heads stayed cool. You can adjust it easily using the openings on the forehead, top of the head, and chin area. That all worked great. And what was also really nice was the snug, sporty fit. Especially for track riding, for sporty riding in general, it's truly a very exciting product. We really enjoyed it.
For me, the most important thing is always rideability. And personally, today, the S1000RR was one of the most pleasant super sports to ride on twisty public roads. Why? Because we had these super tight, technically demanding hairpins. And for that, you need an engine that's smooth on the throttle, something you can control well with your right hand. I mean, you've got an insane amount of power, and in situations like that, smooth power delivery is absolutely key. And that's exactly what I loved about the S1000RR today. Even when you tipped into a hairpin really late, maybe in the wrong gear and had to correct with the throttle, it handled that without a fuss. It didn't throw you off your line or upset the chassis. And for me, that's always a big advantage on the street when you have an engine setup that's intuitive, that you can immediately get used to and trust. And BMW really nailed that here.
One of the good things is that first gear isn't geared too long like on many other superbikes. So even though you're a bit limited with these 1000cc engines when it comes to low-end torque, you can still accelerate out of corners nicely, even from low revs. The engine feels lively and really starts to pick up from around 6,000 to 7,000 RPM. And once you hit that sweet spot where the power really kicks in, yeah, that's when it gets properly fun. The only thing you might notice on the road is that the engine tends to produce high-frequency vibrations, especially through the clip-ons. On longer rides, that can start to get a bit annoying. I wouldn't say your hands go numb, but you do feel the vibrations after a while, like your hands are getting a bit too much blood flow, if you know what I mean. That's something BMW could maybe improve in the future. It's not exactly new either. It's been part of this engine's character for a while now. They've tried to counter it with different bar end weights and heavier handlebars. And while that helps a little, the vibes are still there. In terms of riding position, the distance between the headstock and the seat is relatively short compared to other bikes. That means you're reaching pretty far down onto the aggressively angled clip-ons, and it gives the whole thing a bit of a supermoto feeling. You feel like you're sitting over the front end. The upside is that the bike becomes incredibly agile. Especially in tight corners, you really feel how easy it is to flick the BMW around. And even at higher speeds, it still handles very nicely. That overall agility really makes life easier on this bike. Now, all that agility usually comes at the cost of stability, but BMW compensates for that with a steering damper up front. It's not electronically controlled, you have to adjust it manually, but it does a solid job. Even in its softest setting, it now has a decent amount of baseline damping. That gives the rider enough feedback and confidence during acceleration phases, especially on bumpy roads, to keep things stable and composed. As for the foot peg position, I've got to say, it's surprisingly comfortable for a sport bike. The knee angle isn't overly extreme or aggressive, so even on longer rides, it's still pretty manageable. It's obviously still sporty, but definitely something you can live with for extended street riding. And the brakes, yeah, they're some of the sharper ones I've tried. There's plenty of stopping power, even with a light pull on the lever. Still, they're really nicely controllable. You don't need to worry about them being too grabby. Just approach them with a bit of care and feel your way in. And of course, thanks to the electronics, you've got plenty of safety nets. The ABS makes sure the front wheel doesn't lock up, even in panic stops. And you can gradually dial back all the electronic assists, which is great on the street if you want to get a bit playful with the bike. That short first gear really helps in tighter corners, well, short compared to other superbikes at least. It's still pretty tall compared to most street bikes, but even so, it lets you enjoy those tight turns without the bike feeling bogged down. With that super agile geometry, even this full-on superbike manages to make twisty roads feel easy and fun. So all in all, I've got to say, it's a really well-rounded machine. It's a proper superbike, but it also performs brilliantly out on the road.
And that brings us to the end. We tested it thoroughly for you on the street and on the track. If you've got any questions about the bikes, drop them in the comments. And if you liked what we did, or even if you didn't, let us know. And please don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on any reviews or updates.